Today I'm going to be rooting two different rare varieties of figs. The first one is a black Madeira and the second one is an Italian 258. I bought the cuttings from Figaholics and received them today, so I'm really excited to propagate them with you guys. The first thing I'm gonna do is sanitize my pruners. That way I have them ready to go. And then I'm gonna set them aside while I prep my medium. For this, I'm going to be using an inert medium, which means it has no nutritional value in it. All I'm using is some peat moss and perlite. I'm using about half and half, just a teensy bit more perlite because I want it to be really nice and fluffy so that the roots are able to get through easily. And the first thing I'm going to do is mix it together. You can also use cocoa coir. I alternate depending on what I have on hand, and right now I'm using peat moss because that's what I have. So you mix it as though you were mixing some masa. Now I want to rehydrate it. Once I place them into my baggies, I don't water them anymore. This is the only time that I apply water to my cuttings. So I'm just going to take regular water and I'm going to work it in a little bit at a time. You want your medium to hold together, but when you squeeze it, you don't want water to be running out. When it comes to fig cuttings, it can be as simple as taking your cutting and sticking it in soil. But when you pay $15 or $20 for this, you want to give yourself the best chance for it to root. And that's why I don't just go stick it in a pot, because I want to make sure that I have the best chance at an actual fig tree coming from this piece of a branch. So mix it in and take your time. When it comes to rooting fig cuttings, the moisture level of your medium is very important, because if it's too dry, the cutting will dry out and then the roots will dry out and then you won't get anything. And if it's too wet, the cutting can rot easily. So you want to make sure that there's moisture in there, but you don't want it to be too wet or too dry. It's starting to stick together, but when I squeeze it, no matter how hard I squeeze, there's no water dripping out. I think that actually looks really good. I like to be thorough and check it a few times just to make sure that I don't have any dry spots. And you can kind of tell by the color of the peat moss, whenever it's a little bit more moist, it gets darker. And if you have any dry spots, those will be a lighter color of brown. I'm gonna move on to prepping my bags. I'm gonna try and cut these into 2 or 3 pieces. So I have my rooting hormone right here, along with my parafilm. I'm gonna start off with my black Madeira. I'm gonna take my 2 bags, which are right here. I like to write down the variety and the date that I started propagating them. I don't remember what the date is today. 2 something. I feel like a little kid on Christmas right now. Let's see here. So whenever you're rooting your cuttings, you want to make sure that you're rooting them right side up. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I only have 5 nodes to work with. I'm gonna do 2 nodes for the first one and 3 nodes for the second one. Okay, so I'm gonna cut it right here. The tops of it, I'm gonna wrap with parafilm. Parafilm is great because it prevents the cutting from drying out, and then whenever the buds start swelling, they can easily break through. So that's why I like using this one. I don't wrap it all the way down. I really try and stick to the top node. Sometimes I'll even wrap the second node, but this will be buried inside of the soil. So I'm just gonna leave it right here since this is a smaller piece. Now, usually I make some slits along the bottom. This time around, I'm just gonna try and stick it in rooting hormone. And we'll see how that winds up working out. So just like that. And I'm gonna let it sit there for a little while. And I'm gonna do the same thing over here. So I'm gonna wrap the top with some parafilm. And then I'm gonna place it into my rooting hormone. And while these sit, I'm gonna fill up my bag with my rooting medium. When filling them up, you don't really want to pack it in there. You want to make sure that it stays nice and loose. That way the roots can get through easily. In the past, whenever I've compacted it too much, I feel like it takes longer to see those roots because they need to get through all of that medium versus keeping it nice and fluffy. The roots can easily break through and you'll start to see them in a few weeks. And in this case, I think I'm gonna fill it up a little less than halfway. Then I'm gonna take, oh, I forgot my rubber bands. I'm gonna take my cutting and then I'm gonna place it in there. Just like that. Oh my gosh, it's so little, you can barely see it. But that's fine. So that's my first one. And here's my second one, right there. And I tie this right here with a rubber band. I forgot them, but I'll show you guys what it looks like once I do that. Aside from adding the rubber band, the last thing I'm gonna do is take a toothpick and I'm gonna poke some holes down here at the bottom. I'm not gonna poke any on the sides because I feel like the medium dries out far too quickly. So I'm only gonna add some along the bottom for drainage. And I'm only gonna add about 10 to 12. Here's what this one looks like. It has a lot more nodes. This is the bottom, this is the top. Oftentimes it's easy to tell what the top is when you have this bud up here. But if you're rooting cuttings for the first time, the bottom node is gonna be a little bit more flat and indented, and the one above that is oftentimes a lot more circular. The bottom one is a little bit more elongated or oval shaped, and that's how I can tell. I'm not sure if that was really helpful though. So I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3. Cut right here. 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna cut right here. And for the first one that I cut, I'm going to trim the bottom one more time just to make sure it's a fresh cut. And then I'm gonna go in with my parafilm again. I'm only wrapping the top node to keep it from drying out. And then I'm sticking it into my rooting hormone. So this is the Italian 258. Similar to before, let's fill these bags up with our medium. And again, the last thing I want to do is poke my holes at the bottom. I have to add the rubber bands, you guys. I thought I could do it without them, but just in case my kids get a hold of this, I don't want the soil and the roots going everywhere. So all I'm doing is taking the rubber band and tying it right here, just like this. That way, if it starts leafing out, the new growth can get a little bit more airflow. And the medium won't dry out too fast because it's not going to be fully uncovered. I recently planted a Pakistani Mulberry, and today I cut it back. The reason I did that is because it grows so vigorously here where I live, and it can easily put on 8 to 10 feet in one growing season, if not more. And I have mine in a pot. I'm trying to control its size, so I wanted to cut it back, that way it doesn't get too tall for me. But now that I cut off all this wood, I want to try and propagate it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is take off these leaves. Some of these might be a little bit too skinny to propagate, like this one. I kind of feel like it is. I might set that one aside. But like this one's really good. It has 3 nodes already, and this one has several. So I'm gonna try and do 3 nodes per cutting. This one I'm gonna cut into 3 nodes on this one and then 2 on this one. Similar to my fig cuttings, the first thing I'm gonna do is wrap the top bud in parafilm just to prevent the cutting from drying out. So after I wrap the top, I stick it in some rooting hormone, and I repeat the process for all the other cuttings. I'm also gonna try to root this guy. I'm not gonna add parafilm. We're just gonna see if it works or not. I'm gonna fill up my bag, making sure not to compact it too much. I'm not labeling these bags just because I'm not starting a whole bunch of different varieties. They're all just Pakistani Mulberry, and that way I can reuse the bags whenever I try and root something else. Next, I'm going to take my cuttings and I'm going to insert them in here. And then in this bag, I'm actually gonna place these 2 because they're fairly small. And then if I need to, I'll separate them. But I feel like the skinny one that doesn't have parafilm isn't going to root just because it's such a small cutting, and I don't wanna waste too many bags. So I'm gonna start tying them off now. Out of all the cuttings, I think these 2 have the greatest chance of making it just because their diameter looks really good. They're nice and long. The other ones were really small, so we'll have to see whether they actually take or not. But I think these 2 might. My cuttings are ready to go. The last thing to do is poke a few drainage holes at the bottom. 8, 9, 10. I'm only gonna do around 10. And that's it. Hopefully these Pakistan cuttings root quickly. I've heard mixed reviews. Some people say that they can get them to root very easily, and others say that it's really hard to get them to root. So we'll just have to see, but I have high hopes for them.